Hello and welcome to the IDPro Show. I'm Heather Flanagan, Executive Director of IDPro and Principal Editor of the Body of Knowledge. And with me is Chris Cochran from AKA Identity.
Hello.
And Bailey Bercik, Senior Product Manager at Microsoft.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Welcome to the show. Bailey, I got to ask you, whenever you look at someone's entire body of work, their journey, what was that inflection point that got you into identity?
So identity was my first full-time role at Microsoft. So I had been to Microsoft previously as an intern, working on an internal tool. And I really loved my team, but I wasn't super into the work that I was doing because I didn't feel like it scaled. And a close girlfriend of mine at the time, she was on the identity team at Microsoft. And so when I was saying, I just feel like I'm doing something that's itty bitty, and she said, oh, well, my team, we do billions of sign-ins on a regular basis. And that's the scale at which we do business. And that sounded interesting to me. And so I started fresh out of college in identity, which I know is kind of rare.
That's awesome.
Because you've done kind of a whole lot now that you've been working at Microsoft for a few years. I mean, you've been dealing with the DEF CON Blue Team Village, you've been dealing with SANS, ISC2. I mean, that's a whole lot for someone comparatively new in their career.
Yeah, so I just hit my 5-year mark about a week ago. So it's kind of surreal to be at the point where I'm celebrating a big work anniversary. And, being on such a big product like Microsoft Entra ID, I've gotten to see multiple different aspects of the industry and getting to focus on identity and security related areas. So to your point, presenting at DEF CON's Blue Team Village was absolutely incredible. I think at the time I didn't realize how big that was. So I want to say that was my second year, I think, at the company. So it just kind of blew my mind. Now looking back, knowing what I know now, the opportunities that I've been so grateful to be able to take part in. But it's been really fantastic. The first team I was on was verified ID. And so part of that, we got to file patents and invent new stuff. And so being on the cutting edge of that to now, I get to work on some of our Copilot capabilities. So it's also been exciting to now look at AI and identity and how that all feeds in. So it's been quite a journey and an eventful 5 years. And I get excited each time by new stuff that comes through.
That's cool. Congratulations. 5 years in. I would think that after 5 years, you probably have a good handle on what it is that you do really well. What is your superpower? So what is your superpower? And did that superpower manifest itself earlier in your life, like when you were a kid, or is that something that you cultivated over time?
I would say it's learning new things. So I tend to get bored if I'm doing something monotonous, same thing over and over again. And I've really loved that in the past 5 years that I've been in this role, I've been able to switch up almost every year. I feel like is completely different than the previous in terms of what I get to learn and grow within. So I would say through school, through growing up, whenever there was a new hobby or interest, it's always been fun to dive in and see what I'd be able to master. And I feel like identity has been very similar in that way.
And then what did that show up earlier for you? Could you give us a story of when that superpower reared its head in your life?
Oh my goodness. Superpower for learning in that way. Well, I guess, Heather, you and I spoke about this when you were in New York. So I guess I could speak to growing up in tech, but I don't know if that would be exactly a superpower. I think it's more, being inspired by the people around me. But my grandma was one of the first female electrical engineers in the United States. So
Get out of here.
growing up, I always considered, it's again something that now as I've grown older, I realize how incredibly special that was to grow up with the mental model of an engineer being a grandma. So when I would think about tech companies or you hear about that in the news, my head as a little kid, I'm thinking there's a bunch of elderly women all sitting in a room making a decision. And that's how, all IBM, Intel, Microsoft, all these older tech companies, that's exactly how all those decisions are being made.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't click for me until maybe high school or college that wasn't the way the world worked when people would say, oh, you're on the robotics team. Isn't that special? And I'm thinking that is the most normal thing. Of course I'm on, it was I feel like the Barbie movie that came out this summer kind of exemplified that a little bit, where it was
Yeah.
like, duh, this is of course the way the world works. Why wouldn't it work this way?
Right.
And so because of that, I think, I was able to nurture those interests in STEM at a very early age because I thought it was just a girl thing and something that, would come natural to people. And I'm grateful I stuck with it and, was able to carry that with me.
So one of the things you and I also talked about, because we're geeks and this was fun, is talking about authentication. And
Yes.
specifically as if we wanted to get some more in the IDPro body of knowledge, plug for IDPro body of knowledge right here, link in the show notes. But authentication is an area that is a lot more interesting and a lot bigger than most people think of. Why
Mhm.
why is that the thing that you plugged into as something that you want to write about?
I think it's interesting to realize the amount of methods that we have for authentication and the ease at which it's helpful for users. So, in college as well, I think we touched on this that I worked in a wearable technology research lab and thinking about the different gestures and tools and capabilities that people have to perform action in day to day lives.
Mhm.
And I think that aligns with authentication as well, because you could think about signing into something as being a very simple act. But when you think about what truly needs to sign in? Is it a user, an admin? Is it something that is very privileged? Is it perhaps a workload identity or a machine that's needing to sign in to do something else and prove that it is who they say they are? I think that solving those problems and thinking of different use cases is super interesting, and that there's not a one size fits all approach oftentimes for all the different use cases. So I think that's kind of cool to develop different capabilities there.
What would you say is one of your favorite authentication mechanisms, right? Because we can go early to password and credential authentication all the way up through like continuous authentication, like in almost like in a sci-fi realm. What would you say is your favorite? And it could be a future state as well.
Oh my goodness. Well, I guess if any of my customers that I work with are listening, it would be passwordless because that's what I've been trying to drive all of them to go do,
Yeah.
to move off of passwords and make things, I think that passwordless is such an exciting area that I've been trying to push more and more folks toward because it's not only helpful for the users it's one of the rare things that the security and identity teams get to roll out that your everyday users are going to love. And so when I think about anything from signing in with a biometric like my face onto my laptop or on my cell phone, you know, things like that make my life so much easier that I don't have to go through and type in something every time. And also it makes me, more secure as a user. So it gives that frictionless experience while also reducing risk, which I think is, a good way to go about doing things.
What are the ways in which, for anyone that's uninitiated, what are the ways in which passwordless can work for, regular people at home and even in the workforce?
Yeah, so regular people at home, that would look like with your iPhone or Android device. So Face ID, for example, as one of the brand names for that, that you're just able to sign in without having to remember anything else, especially since we're telling users that they should be having unique passwords across various websites, unless they're using some sort of password manager or, have some sort of unique method for keeping all those straight in their head. That can be very difficult. So I think that, for folks at home or for folks who maybe trying to convert some non-technical members of their family or friends to be able to use more secure authentication methods. That could be a quicker sell to be able to say to go use your device in that manner. Also, passkeys are excellent for that too. It's again making that process easier and more user friendly with reducing that friction and reducing risk as well.
We had so first off, I'm a huge Passkey fan, great in support because I do think it's almost like magic. It's almost too much like
Mhm.
magic because people now associate no, seriously, they associate friction with security,
Hmm.
right? In that no, if they just manage to swoop right into the service with nothing perceived in their way, these days there's a certain amount of wait, if it was that, why didn't it ask me for anything? Why did it just work? Can this work for just anybody? And so my mom, bless her, would probably be very concerned. Um, but that's not my question. My question is, so we recently had a great interview with Dean Sachs, who wrote an article on account recovery for the IDPro body of knowledge. And one of the article was about account recovery. And I do wonder, I mean, the passkeys are fantastic when everything works, but if someone loses the thing the passkey is on, because, whether it's a little hardware token like a FIDO Yubico key, or whether it's their phone that they dropped in the toilet, it happens. How they're supposed to recover from these experiences when you're right, it's not in the password manager anymore. It's tied to this thing that either they don't have or it no longer works. How do you see us getting around that point? Is that something on the roadmap?
Absolutely. So I would say, first of all, to your point on passkeys having less friction, I think it's such a shame that we associate an experience that is cumbersome with an experience that's being secure, because I think that can create some security theater or make it be perceived that I have to jump through all of these hoops in order to have a more secure experience. When really, if we're building better technology to empower users to also be secure and go about their day to day lives, that is the goal, to let it be invisible to the user or in a way that they can accomplish the task they need to do and not be worried about something being compromised. I do think that with account recovery, it is very difficult because if I think about it from an attacker mindset, there are so many ways that I could abuse different account recovery systems and things of that nature. Something that I encourage a few customers to do is to have multiple methods that are tied to vital accounts for recovery. So if I'm thinking of my high value accounts, like a bank account or a corporate, email address or things of that nature, being able to have, perhaps a FIDO key as well as the pass key on my iPhone or things of that nature to sign in. So that way, if one is lost, hopefully you didn't lose both of them. But it is imperfect. It's something that um, we think back to when the internet was first being created. I don't think that at that time folks were envisioning for it to be at the scale it's at today and for the scale of accounts to be where they are at this point in time. So it's similar to securing a home or, a vehicle, that there's never going to be a perfect way. We can just reduce the risk of certain things like that happening.
Speaking of account recovery, it makes me think of a meme. It's pretty much an internet meme at this point of someone like trying to log into their account and then they reset their password and it's like you can't use a previous password to log in, right? And so I'm thinking like you've probably seen all kinds of craziness, good and bad, when it comes to authentication and identity. Do you have a horror story that you could tell where you like this was just a complete headache and completely open to where you take that?
Oh my goodness. So this actually got me interested in security in the first place. My Apple ID got hacked and held for ransom when I was a sophomore or junior in college. And I
Wow.
remember it because I was, on because I was at home, with my roommates, and I'm seeing on my phone it pops up, the this iPhone is lost or whatnot, and it displays a message. And it was in a different language. So I had to use Google Translate on my friend's phone to come up with what it was saying. And it was basically saying, to send money to some random email address in order to get my account back. So I've been in
Mm.
that position personally where it was completely terrifying. And what I ended up doing is that since I had a MacBook as well, I was able to get my Apple ID back by signing in through my laptop and going about it that way. But it can be incredibly scary. And I personally had that horror story where I think, oh my goodness, everything that's on my device is in someone else's hands. How do I
Mm.
get it back? What's the best way to do it? And this was before I had gotten into identity or security. So this was, pre being a professional in that field. So firsthand, it is incredibly terrifying and it can be a big horror story. And it happens to everyday people as well as large organizations all of the time. And I think at the end of the day, it's again simplifying that experience for the user. So to your
Mhm.
point in that meme where that person is saying, oh, well, you've used that password before. Well, changing your password at a certain period of time doesn't really reduce risk in any way unless we know for a fact that password has been compromised. Just like how if I'm changing the locks on my home repeatedly, if I don't know if somebody else has a key or, if I have the one key to my home and I just keep changing the locks for myself on that one key, that doesn't really, reduce my risk of somebody breaking into my home, for
Mhm.
example. So I think that it circles back to again, how can we make these processes helpful for the users. So that way also users aren't feeling that security is an inconvenience to them, and taking away certain steps that are valuable, like MFA, for example, having to sell family and friends of turning on MFA when they think, oh my gosh, this is annoying that I'm getting a text message to my phone, when we've statistically seen that it reduces your risk of compromise by 99.9%, at least on the Microsoft side, when we look at, user accounts that do versus do not have MFA.
Mhm.
So it again circles back to, it's not helpful when we teach end users that security is being uncomfortable or cumbersome, or doing something that is out of your way in order to accomplish your end task.
Mhm.
That's a super good point. Um, what made me think about was the type of person that would say, "Ugh, but this is just annoying. I don't want to have to use MFA. I don't want to have to do this because I just want to get into my game." How important is my game
Hmm.
really? I mean, if someone hacks it, I lose virtual points. It doesn't, this is just not that important. Why should I have to do this? And I think that concept scales all the way up to enterprise in terms of understand what it is you're trying to protect, because not everything requires the same level of protection. But that said, it you might be protecting more than you think, because even in that gaming software, you have probably registered an account, and you may very well have registered your phone number, your email address, possibly, personal information about you. You've now connected it to a circle of friends. I mean, that some of that information is in fact worth protecting. So being aware of what information is out there and to properly justify what level of protection you're going to put on it is something I think everybody can learn from.
Absolutely, especially since the end user might not be able to make that judgment call as to what is something that is more private than something else, for
Mhm.
example. But I do think that it again circles back to, how can we make this process easy for end users and give them great experience while reducing risk?
Mhm. I got a question for both of you. A colleague actually sent an article this morning that was talking about the 10 reasons why your organization needs a chief identity officer. And I'm of the mind that that can further complicate things in the enterprise, because you have the CIO, right, that's over IT, and you have the CISO, which is over security. And a lot of times they don't work well together, right? I think it's improving, that relationship is growing and developing. But then you bring in an additional person that's over identity, which has a bleed into security. It also has a bleed into identity. I'd love to hear from both of you. Like, what do you think about that position of chief identity officer? Is that necessary, or is that something that's just going to complicate things further?
Oh, I have opinions, but Bailey, you go ahead.
Oh, I would say that it really depends on the organization.
Hmm.
So, over the past few years, I've been able to see organizations of all size and scale, and especially if you are an incredibly large organization where there's a lot of complexity there, sometimes it can be a huge benefit to have somebody else who is more specialized, or somebody who can be a go-between
Yep.
for other positions. But I think it really does depend on your org structure and what is convenient for you to be able to communicate. Also, the talent that you have in those positions. So, I don't necessarily think that just by having one job description that's filled, or somebody with a specific title, is going to significantly reduce risk or make positive changes to your organization. It comes down to the people, the structure, and the way that the whole group collaborates together.
Hmm.
Okay, now I'm gonna change my answer a little bit because I agree with you. Uh, but my first thought was honestly, "Oh, yeah, let's add another layer of abstraction. What could
Yeah.
possibly go wrong?"
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
But, for small organizations, no, no, you do not
Right.
need another layer of
Mhm.
abstraction. It's really a waste of time. For larger organizations, I can see the value, but I can also seeing it being a really hard job, because you're
Hmm.
gonna you're gonna irritate everybody. You're going to find friction with the CISO office, because you're going to try and perhaps, I hope, balance usability with security. But on the flip side, you're going to find friction with your HR office or your enterprise application office or whatnot, because you're going to put some, baseline requirements as to best practice when it comes to managing digital identities. So, you're gonna have to be a very special person in that role to be able to turn all of these into carrots of, "This is why this is great, awesome, and wonderful," and not the stick that it's gonna come across as in that, "No, you can't do it the way you want to do it because reasons," and then just get all your other, C-suite people mad at you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You'd have to have a thick skin.
I agree because in a complex organization, like let's say you're a conglomerate that just does mergers and acquisitions for lunch, then you're going to have all these different disparate IDPs and things that have to be orchestrated together. So yeah, absolutely, I think that would make a lot of sense. But for your standard company that's below the 1%, it probably wouldn't be worth the squeeze.
There's a gentleman who gives a talk periodically about what it's like to be in an organization that has done mergers and acquisitions many times. His name is John Letnan. He works at Okta, and his points on that about the challenges of integrating disparate identity management systems and different disparate identity management practices and policies.
Mm.
Uh, if you're that big that you're doing that kind of thing, even temporarily having someone who has the experience in identity to be able to look across all of these policies and normalize them is probably not a bad idea.
Bailey, so I got to ask, what has been the most crucial skill that you've developed in your tenure in the world of tech, in the world of identity? What would you say is that one thing that you just had to continuously improve and iterate on that made the biggest change in your career?
I would say learning the basics quickly for whatever area that you are switching into. So, as I mentioned previously, I've gotten to wear several hats over the past couple of years. And one thing that has been very helpful that a mentor of mine taught me is that if you just master the basics in any area, this could
Mhm.
be career wise, personal life wise, for whatever that is, you are going to have a basis of knowledge that you can build upon. And you can at least be in the room to understand and grow from there with whatever it is new that you're taking on. So, for example, since Copilot is now, a hot topic over in Microsoft land and something
Mhm.
that has been exciting that, our teams have been building out and being a part of, the ability to understand AI and how that works and how that might integrate with identity and how that might work with security and things of that nature. Being able to just spend a weekend or a couple days and fully devote time to being able to learn what are the basics of this? What do I need to be able to have a solid conversation on it? And then go from there and come back on Monday and be able to start from there is much more beneficial to your time than just picking things up bits and pieces as you go along when you take on something new or if a new tech advancement is coming out that you need to brush up on. So just by mastering those basics, you're able to build up that confidence and then grow from there. And I think that that's been incredibly beneficial since identity is something that, especially if you're starting fresh out of college or if you're changing careers into, can be very intimidating since there's a lot of complexity, a lot of legacy systems that are still at play across customers, and you're not going to be an expert in all of it overnight. So, being able to have those conversations and build upon it and have those frameworks of understanding is super key.
Well, and I'm going to ask a very tactical question because thinking about, all right, you're going to spend a good solid handful of days learning the basics. How? I mean, are do you read books? Do you read articles? Do you go punch buttons in the
Mhm.
software and hope stuff doesn't break? How do you actually pick all of the basics up and learn them? If you're trying to advise someone coming into this and you say, "Go learn the basics," and they go, "How?" What would you say?
That is actually an incredible question. So I would say you find somebody who you think is very knowledgeable about it and then ask them. So when I think about, when I was ramping up on AI for my current position, I asked somebody who I felt knew quite a bit about AI, or at least when I would hear him in meetings talk about it, I was like, this guy knows his stuff. Okay, so what are your favorite books, blog posts, things of that nature? And he just sent me a quick little list of his favorite things. And I was like, great, that's what I'm going to go learn. And then naturally from those resources, was it the perfect learning path? It was a great one to be able to pick into his brain. And then I was also able to see, okay, based off of this, now I'm questioning how does XYZ work? Or I want to know more about this. And good thing that this book, in the resources, it links over to this area. So I think that's a good starting point just to get an idea of where to even begin. And if you don't have access to a person who you might think be a great mentor in that field or whatnot, finding a public figure, oftentimes they will have some sort of um, Twitter account, blog post, articles they've been in, interviews that they've had, where sometimes they'll drop the name of a book or a teacher or something in that nature that you can then go and research. And I found this to be true, whether you're learning dance, for example, and you can go ask somebody, hey, how did you get started in ballet? What are
Mhm.
the crucial things that you need to learn? If you could go back 10 years ago, what's one mistake that you wish did not make so that I can, prepare and stand on the shoulders of giants essentially to go learn. And I think that that's super beneficial because it saves you a lot of time experimentation wise and gives you the confidence once you get those building blocks to be able to not start from zero, but at least start from, a good 20% and then build from there.
Yep, that's exactly what I tell folks. I created a framework a couple years ago called Exist. It's an acronym. The EX is explore, right? So whether you're talking about an identity, you're talking about technology, a sport, a hobby, whatever it is, explore the many facets of that thing, and then you're going to find something that's going to speak to you. There's going to be an aspect that might interest you or it might not, and you might pivot to something else. But once you find that thing that's interesting, then it's I immerse. If you wanted to learn Japanese as fast as possible, what would you do? You'd probably move to Japan and spend some time there, right? Because now you're surrounded with the ideologies, the imagery of everything that that topic has to offer. And so you almost like learn through osmosis, but then you go from something that's passive to active. So you go from that I to that S, which is study. And this is not just your classic study, I'm going to read a book and take a test, but study, this is practical application. This is having your own project that you're building on to kind of like get your hands dirty with whatever that thing is. And then the final T is that translate or transform. You don't want to just learn all these skills and say, that was cool. And you go off to the next thing, but leverage the things that you've learned to either translate it to other folks. This could be your board. This could be your security team. This could be your IT comrades. This could be children, teaching children about whatever the thing is that you learned, or transform. This is up leveling that community, up leveling your team, or even yourself. But yeah, I would say that that's one of the most important things is being able to figure out a framework for how do you learn this thing and get really good at it.
I love that framework. I am going to refer to that. You said you call it the Exist framework?
Exist. Yep.
All right.
Take it.
Exist by Chris.
Well, it does, now I've got one final question maybe to wrap us up, and that is, so you've got basics at this point across a variety of different fields. What are you going to build? What are your where do you want to go with your career?
Well, I guess, and Heather, you and I spoke about this when we were there in person. I love to, find something new and explore it and go learn it and then move on to the next cool, exciting thing. And so what's great about that is that your previous experiences are also helpful for now building with your new one because you have those previous insights that you're able to carry over. Um, and so when I think about the next 5 years, now that I have 5 years under my belt already, um, I want to be able to stay sharp on what new technologies are coming on the frontier. So I think part of that is paying attention to what is newly developing and then thinking about how I can be ahead of the curve and be useful and be thinking about new techniques and experiences that might benefit customers and other organizations there too. So it's been addictive to get into the scale that identity provides career wise, where I can make a change or ship something new and being able to see just the sheer impact of it is really delightful in that sense. So when I think about what's next, I want to be doing something that's innovative. I want to be doing something that still has scale and something that is making experiences better for users and organizations. So I don't know if that's a little bit too fluffy, but I feel like at this point, now that I've made it over that hurdle, I'm thinking like, oh my goodness, well, now what is next? I guess I'm in identity now since getting started in it. I didn't perceive that my career would be identity and security, but I guess now it is. Because as an intern, I was just excited to get somewhere like Microsoft. I was like, okay, now I've made it. That's it, And so when I think about what's next, it's exciting to think about all the possibilities that are there. And it's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
stay tuned. I'll tell you in 5 years.
Sounds good. And we'll have to bring you back on in 5 years to see where you went. Bailey, thank you so much for hopping on the mics with us today. And thanks everybody for watching or listening to this episode. Huge thank you to AKA Identity and also IDPro for allowing Heather and I to explore this crazy world of identity. If you want to learn more about Bailey and all the things that she has going on, be sure to drop into the show notes wherever you're watching or listening to this. And with that, we will see everyone in the next episode.